Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Sunday? Yehud in South Carolina, Shandor in the Bronx, Bell in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Karen in Northern California, Nancy in North Carolina, Bell in Texas. Chat is disabled on the YouTube. Can't be. Reload. Come on. There we go. Chaim in Florida, Elon in Silver Spring, and Goldie in Albuquerque. Welcome, everybody. Relatively short daf, and I want to try to make it to the kind of earlier evening minyan. So let's see if we can move efficiently. Okay, our daf is page 12, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of this debate between Rabbi Yochanan and ben-Beseira about the Pesach, the Passover offering, when the temple was standing, what would happen if it was brought in the morning, right? The Torah says it has to be brought in the afternoon. It seems to say it has to be brought in the afternoon. The sages are arguing that, well, this phrase, ben ha'arbayim, which technically could mean between the evenings, according to ben-Beseira, might indicate that the Pesach could be slaughtered not only in the afternoon of the 14th of Nissan, and then Passover begins that night, but it could include the morning as well. But then we see other instances of this same term that does seem to mean in the afternoon, like the daily offering. The second one is brought in the afternoon. The lamps that are lit in the menorah seem to be indicated that they're going to burn all night, and they need to be lit in the afternoon before the evening. So how could ben-Beseira say that it's possible to slaughter it in the morning and it would be fit? Or conversely, if it was a Pesach that was slaughtered not for its sake and it was slaughtered in the morning, then it would be fit because the morning, or say then it would not be fit. I'm confused, right? Because the Pesach, right? If you slaughtered it on the 13th of Nissan and not for its sake, okay, then it's not in its time and not for its sake, and then it could be rendered a peace offering. But if you slaughter a Pesach not for its sake, but at the correct time, like on the afternoon, then that would be rendered unfit because it is the right time. You can't turn it into something else when it's the time that it is supposed to be being slaughtered. But if we're saying that the morning is like the afternoon, then that would apply to the morning as well. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no, the morning is not its time. Only the afternoon is its time. Okay, we're picking this up at the top of page 12a. The Gemara asks, just as it is written explicitly that the menorah must be lit in the evening, there too, with regard to the Pesach, it is written, Deuteronomy 16:6, there you shall sacrifice the Pesach at evening. Evening. So now in two different verses, one seems to be saying in the afternoon, and the other one seems to be saying in the evening. Now, evening can't be the night. It has to be slaughtered during the day. They eat it at night. The people who are going to be part of that, those celebrants celebrating Pesach together when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. Okay, so how can ben-Beseira claim that it may be sacrificed all day long? It sounds like either the late afternoon or the afternoon, but certainly not the morning. So the Gemara answers, that verse comes to teach a different law, that a certain item should be sacrificed after another item, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the order of precedence between the Pesach and the daily afternoon offering. This is interesting because who brings a Pesach? That's not a communal offering. That's not brought on behalf of the nation. That means that all the people would come up to Jerusalem They would come in groups, right? Groups would register in advance to be a group that's going to celebrate Pesach together. And this is their lamb. But these are lambs that belong to individuals. Groups of individuals, okay. But the daily offering, that's a unique animal brought every day, morning and afternoon, on behalf of the nation. Okay, well, nevertheless, which one are you going to bring first? The daily offering or the thousands and thousands, possibly millions of Pesachim? So let's see who takes precedence in that situation. According to this Baraisa, as it is taught in the Baraisa with regard to the order of precedence between the Pesach and the daily afternoon offering, an item, in this case the Pesach, with regard to which both the expressions in the evening and ben-Arba'im, afternoon, are stated, should be sacrificed after an item, the daily afternoon offering, with regard to which ben-Arba'im, only the word afternoon is stated. Right? So the Torah, with regard to the daily offering, there's one in the morning and one in the afternoon. About that offering, it only says in the afternoon. About the Pesach, in one place it says in the afternoon, another place it says the evening. And this is to tell you that the priests in the Holy Temple would bring the daily offering of the afternoon first, and then they would, slaughter all those Pesachim and sprinkle their bloods on the altar. And then the people would take their slaughtered Pesachim, right, a lamb or a kid goat, out to the place where they were going to eat it with their group. The Gemara answers. The Gemara asks, but is there anything comparable to ben-Beseira's suggestion that if one slaughters it in the morning, you say that it is its designated time and it is fit, but when afternoon comes, you say that the item should be sacrificed only after the daily afternoon offering, right? Following ben-Beseira's logic, it sounds like he's saying, well, if it's brought in the afternoon, it has to be brought after the afternoon offering, but it could be brought in the morning, right? So that's what ben-Beseira seems to be saying, and the Gemara is saying that doesn't sound right. Is there any other example where that could be? Now the Gemara answers, yes, there is another example like that. As Rabbi Yochanan says, if one did not recite the additional prayers of Shabbos, the Musaf, right? When you go to shul, to synagogue on Saturday morning, you say Shachris, right? The morning prayers, which includes the Amidah, right? The standing prayer, also known in the Talmud as the prayer, which during the week contains 18 blessings. On Shabbos, I think only 11. But at any rate, there is the Shachris Amida, and then there's the Musaf, right? So the Musaf is a prayer that corresponds to the additional offerings that were brought on Shabbos when the temple was standing. There was the daily offering that's brought, 365 days a year. On Shabbos, there's the Musaf, the additional offerings. Now that we don't have the temple, we have the daily prayers that are said every day, and there's the Musaf, the additional prayer that's said on Shabbos. So if for some reason you didn't say the Musaf Amida, or the Musaf prayers on Saturday morning, and now it becomes Saturday afternoon, and now you have to say the Saturday afternoon prayer, the Mincha of Shabbos. So which do you say first? The Mincha and then the Musaf that you owe from the morning, or the Musaf that you still owe from the morning, and then the Mincha. Right? So Rabbi Yochanan says in that situation, the law is that he should recite Mincha, the afternoon prayer, first, and then the Musaf thereafter. So the Musaf should have been said in the morning. If you put it off to the afternoon, you first say the afternoon prayer, and then the Musaf. And so, likewise, right, ben-Beseira could say that the Pesach should be slaughtered in the afternoon after the afternoon offering, but it's also possible to slaughter it in the morning. No one else agrees with him, but that would be the way he would argue. The Gemara asks, but if the term ben-Arba'im, which we're translating as afternoon, is referring to the entire day, as ben-Beseira maintains, then why do I need those instances of the expression that are written with regard to the burning the incense and lighting the lamps? which are not performed all day. They definitely have to be done in the afternoon. So, why would ben ha'arbaim mean in the afternoon with respect to every other time it's mentioned in the Torah, but with respect to the Pesach imply that it could be done all day? Furthermore, this interpretation of the opinion of ben-Beseira is difficult, as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, responded on behalf of ben-Beseira to the statement of Rabbi Yehoshua that a Pesach slaughtered not for its sake on the morning of the 14th of Nissan is fit, right? We know that any other day of the year, not Pesach afternoon, Pesach can refer either to the day of Passover or the Paschal offering that's brought on that day. So a Pesach offering brought on any other day than Pesach, if you slaughter it not as a Pesach, but you call it a Shalomim, a peace offering, then even though you designated that animal to be a Pesach, now that you've redesignated it as a peace offering, as long as you brought it on any other day other than Pesach, it works as a peace offering, right? We already established that law. So the question is, does that apply on the morning of Pesach? The law is that you have to slaughter in the afternoon. So if you now slaughter it in the morning, even though it's Pesach, but it's that time of day when you're not supposed to be slaughtering it, can you redesignate a Pesach as a Shalomim and slaughter it that morning and it would be fit? Rebbe says, yes. That would indicate that the morning is not a fit time to slaughter the Pesach as a Pesach. And is Rebbe saying that ben-Beseira would agree with that? Right? It says, Rebbe responded on behalf of ben-Beseira to the statement of Rabbi Yehoshua that a Pesach slaughtered not for its sake on the morning of the 14th is fit, as though it were slaughtered on the 13th. No. So now Rebbe's answer is saying what ben-Beseira would answer when Rabbi Yehoshua says that you could slaughter it not for its sake on the morning of the 14th. Ben-Beseira would say, no. If no part of the day is fit for sacrificing the Pesach, shall you also say that the law with regard to the 14th, part of which is fit for sacrificing the Pesach? Since it can be sacrificed in the afternoon of the 14th, if it is slaughtered in the morning, not for its sake, it is disqualified. Not because it's permitted to be sacrificed in the morning, but rather simply because the morning, when it's not permitted, is nevertheless part of the same day, which includes the afternoon when you're supposed to sacrifice it. Therefore, if you slaughtered it in the morning for the sake of a Pesach, if you slaughtered in the morning not for the sake of a Pesach, nevertheless, it would not become fit because it, at the end of the day, is a Pesach offering being slaughtered during the daytime of Erev Pesach. And that would mean that it is unfit, even though you're not supposed to slaughter it in the morning. And the Gemara concludes, and if it is so that a Pesach can be sacrificed throughout the day of the 14th, all of it is fit, not only part of it. But this is self-contradictory. So, rather, Rabbi Oshaya's interpretation of ben-Beseira's opinion is rejected. Instead, Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to a Pesach that one slaughtered on the 14th in the morning, ben-Beseira would deem it unfit, whether it was slaughtered for its sake or not for its sake. It is unfit even if it was slaughtered not for its sake, since part of the day is fit for the sacrifice as a Pesach. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's saying that the morning is okay, or he's not saying it's okay, but the fact is it's going to be rendered unfit because the morning is attached to the afternoon when you're supposed to be slaughtering it. Rabbi Abahu ridiculed this interpretation. And the word for ridiculed is megadeth. Kind of interesting. Okay, if so, how can you find... So Rabbi Abahu is speaking a little bit sarcastically. If so, how can you find a fit Pesach according to ben-Beseira if its owner designated an animal now on the morning of the 14th as a Pesach? It is disqualified from the outset, as it cannot be sacrificed at all, either for its sake or not for its sake. And even if its owner designated it the previous day when it was fit to be sacrificed, not for its sake, it was fit, and then it became disqualified the next morning when it was no longer fit to be sacrificed until the afternoon. This is based on the principle that once an offering is disqualified, it can no longer become fit. Now, I don't think this really follows from the logic of the situation that Rabbi Abahu is arguing against, that just because it was designated to be a Pesach, and now the morning of the 14th arrives, that it becomes disqualified even if you didn't slaughter it, just because it was already designated. I think Rabbi Abahu is being sarcastic, but now they're going to play with this idea of something that was disqualified remains disqualified, even if the reason it became disqualified no longer applies. That's where we're headed. So, rather, Abahu says, let the Pesach be fit when it is designated on the 14th afternoon, when it may already be sacrificed as a Pesach. Now, I'm struggling to understand, because the people who brought their lamb up to Jerusalem to be the Pesach, they had already designated it. They're not designated it as the Pesach when they get there, but maybe they are. Maybe they're just bringing the sheep so that they have sheep available, they have lambs available, that they can consecrate as a Pesach, and they don't actually do the consecrating until the afternoon of the 14th of Nissan, Erev Pesach, and that would avoid all these difficulties. Now, Abaye says, you may even say that it is fit if you designated it in the morning, as an offering is not disqualified due to the fact that it is an offering whose time has not yet arrived, if its time will arrive on that same day. And Rav Papa says you may even say that it is fit if designated from the previous night, as an offering that was designated at night and may be sacrificed the following day is not considered an offering whose time has not yet arrived. As it is taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael, although an animal is unfit for sacrifice until its 8th day, on the night before its 8th day, it may already enter the den to be tithed. And this is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Abatariki, as Rabbi Abatariki raises a contradiction. It is written, when a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, then it shall be 7 days with its mother, Leviticus 22:27. And then if you wanted to use it as an offering, it may be used as an offering from the 8th day forward. But you can't take a baby animal to be used as a sacrifice before the 8th day. Consequently, on the following night, i.e. the night before the 8th day, it is now fit for sacrifice, even though it won't be sacrificed until daylight, because animal sacrifices are always done in the day, since the night is part of the day, right? On the Hebrew calendar, the new day always begins that night, or let's say the previous night. Therefore, you could designate it that night and then sacrifice it the next day. It's all happening on the 8th day. And it is written subsequently in that verse, but from the 8th day and on from the 8th day and on, it may be accepted for an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Consequently, on the previous night, i.e. the night before the 8th day, it is not yet fit. And this seems to be self-contradictory. How do we reconcile these texts? At night, it is fit for consecration, and the following day, it is fit for effecting acceptance. In other words, doing the sacrifice. You consecrate it the night before, and then you can only bring it for a sacrifice the next day. So apparently, an offering that may be sacrificed the following day can be consecrated the previous night, even though it may not be sacrificed at night, and it is not considered an offering whose time has not yet arrived. What they're playing with is the idea that, well, since you can't bring it at night, if you consecrated it at night during a time when it cannot be brought, does that disqualify it in a way that it will remain disqualified? Can you consecrate an animal that is not yet fit to be sacrificed and therefore should not be consecrated yet? And in this particular situation, you could do that. New topic. Rabbi Abahu presumes that an animal that is consecrated before it may be sacrificed is disqualified, right? That was the basis of Rabbi Abahu's objection and his sarcastic rendering of the opinion of ben-Beseira. That if you designate an animal, if you consecrate an animal during a time when it may not be brought as that, right? So he's saying, like, how could you ever have a fit Pesach, right? If you can only consecrate a Pesach on Pesach, but it's going to pass through a time that's going to disqualify it, meaning the morning, then how would you ever have a fit Pesach unless you waited till the afternoon to consecrate it? Right? Rabbi Abahu presumes that an animal consecrated before it may be sacrificed is disqualified. With regard to this, Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Abahu, shall we say that Rabbi Yochanan holds that consecrated animals that cannot be sacrificed at any given moment are disqualified from ever being sacrificed? If you consecrate an animal during a time when it is not permitted to sacrifice that animal, have you thereby disqualified it? Because you weren't permitted to sacrifice it yet, you also weren't permitted to consecrate it. And since you did consecrate it, you set it aside as an animal that can't be used. It was consecrated, but you also disqualified it from actually being brought as a sacrifice. That's the claim being made here. And Rabbi Abahu said to him, yes, as Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to an animal belonging to two partners, if one of them consecrated the half of it that belongs to him, and then purchased the other half from his partner and consecrated the second half, okay, so it is consecrated, despite the fact that it was consecrated piecemeal. But it may not be sacrificed, since when he first consecrated it, the consecration did not extend to his partner's half. Since the animal was therefore not fit to be sacrificed, since he consecrated an animal that was only half his, it was not fit to be sacrificed. Therefore, his consecration actually disqualified the animal from ever being sacrificed. And that disqualification is permanent. But since it is consecrated, it can render consecrated as a substitute a non-sacred animal that is exchanged for it. Now remember, the law of the temura, the substitute, is something that we're not allowed to do. If you consecrate an animal and you're going to bring it, then you can't say, you know what, I changed my mind. Instead of bringing that animal, I'm going to bring this animal. So you tried to make a substitute. Then the second animal, the substitute, also becomes consecrated, but it may not be brought as a sacrifice. It's a disqualifying matter. And you did something wrong. Actually, you did a sin. That's an avera. That's not permitted to do, and that's the consequence of it. I think it cannot be brought. Definitely, it is consecrated, but so is the first animal. Right? You don't remove the first animal from its consecration. And so this animal that he consecrated piecemeal and therefore disqualified from ever being brought as an actual sacrifice, if you then tried to make a substitute for it, that law of the temura will apply in this substitute situation as well. So it can now render consecrated as a substitute a non-sacred animal that is exchanged for it. If the owner substitutes a non-sacred animal for this one that was consecrated piecemeal and thus disqualified, the second animal becomes consecrated as well. And yet its substitute is like it. It too is consecrated, but cannot be sacrificed. Right? I guess we're in the standard situation. If it wasn't disqualified, it was a normal consecration, then you tried to make a substitute. Now both animals are consecrated and could be sacrificed. And one can conclude 3 points from this complex technical statement. Conclude from it that animals that cannot be sacrificed are permanently disqualified, and conclude from it that disqualification from the outset, i.e., from the time the offering is consecrated, is a permanent disqualification, and conclude from it that there is permanent disqualification even in a case where the animal possesses sanctity that inheres in its monetary value rather than inherent sanctity in the animal itself. Now we're on page 12b. Those conclusions are actually not the halacha, but that's what we would conclude from the statement that was just made. Now we're going to analyze that a little bit more closely. Ula says that Rabbi Yochanan says, right? Ula, always very important figure because he was one of the sages that traveled back and forth between Eretz Yisrael, where the more authoritative rulings were, and the community in Bavel, like Pumbedisa and Syria, where there were great academies, great yeshivas, and less persecution, right? The sages who had the more authoritative rulings were not as free to learn and teach because they were under the Roman occupation in the land of Israel. The sages in Bavel, which is part of the Persian Empire, were more free to learn and discuss, and that's why we're reading the Babylonian Talmud. But they always wanted to, hear what was going on in Eretz Yisrael, and Ula was one of the people that would bring them the rulings from the sages in the land of Israel. Okay, so Ula says that Rabbi Yochanan says, and Rabbi Yochanan was based in Israel, if one ate forbidden fat and designated an offering to atone for the transgression, right? This is a chatas, a sin offering. He ate prohibited fat unwittingly, and so he designated an animal to be his sin offering, his chatas. And then he apostatized, right? So interesting. He set aside his animal to be a sin offering, and then for some reason he went off the derech, off the path, right? He became an unobservant Jew, a heretic, all right? So he committed that sin. Then he set aside the animal to bring it as a sin offering, but then before he could actually bring it to Jerusalem as an offering, he became a heretic. And we've learned elsewhere that the offerings of heretics are not accepted because they reject the Torah. That's what it means to be a heretic. They say, well, I don't have to follow those laws. So we don't accept they would not accept the offerings of heretics. So if he became a heretic between designating the animal and when it would have been brought, then what? All right? So he ate forbidden fat, he designated an offering to atone for his transgression, and then he became a heretic, thereby disqualifying himself from bringing an offering. But later, he recanted his heresy, became an observant Jew again. Since the offering was already disqualified, it shall be disqualified permanently. And we will note in passing that I see from a note here from Rav Steinsaltz that is not the halacha. Right? That is not the law. In that situation, he actually could bring the offering as long as some other intervening factor was not present. The fact that he set aside the offering, he became a heretic, and then he recanted his heresy, then he could bring the offering because he's no longer a heretic. This is one of those examples that shows why we don't paskin from the Gemara, right? We encounter rulings in the Gemara that may or may not be the halacha, right, where the law ended up on a certain question. Now, it was also stated that Rabbi Yirmiyah says, that Rabbi Bahu says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, if one ate forbidden fat and designated an offering to atone for his transgression, and then he became an imbecile, another person who's not qualified to bring an offering, and then again, he became halakhically competent, right? Something happened to his mind, he did not have his wits, therefore he was disqualified from bringing offerings, but then he regained his wits. Since the offering was already disqualified, it shall be disqualified permanently. Again, not the halacha. The Gemara notes, and both statements are necessary if you do subscribe to this view of Rabbi Yochanan, as if Rabbi Yochanan had taught us only the first statement concerning an apostate, one might have reason that the offering is permanently disqualified because he disqualified himself by his own action. But here, in the case of one who became an imbecile, where he was disqualified through a process that occurs by itself, he didn't purposely become an imbecile. Then when he becomes competent again, he may bring his sacrifice, as it is considered as though he were asleep. If one designated an offering and fell asleep, then certainly that does not disqualify it. And if Rabbi Yochanan had taught us only this statement here with regard to one who became an imbecile, one might have reasoned that the offering is permanently disqualified because it is not in his power to return to competence. But here, in the case of an apostate, since it is in his power to recant his apostasy, I would say that the offering is not permanently disqualified. Therefore, both statements are necessary according to the view of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yirmiyah raises a dilemma. If one ate forbidden fat and designated an offering for the transgression, and then the court ruled that the type of fat he ate is permitted, thereby rendering the offering unnecessary, and the court subsequently retracted its ruling, this case, then, what is the law? Is the offering permanently disqualified, or is it not permanently disqualified? And a certain elder said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, when Rabbi Yochanan introduced the topic of permanently disqualified offerings, he introduced it with this case. What is the reason? There, in the case of one who apostatized or became an imbecile, although the person was disqualified, the offering itself was not disqualified. Consequently, it is less evident that the offering will be disqualified permanently. But here, in a case where the court ruled that the fat is permitted, the offering itself was also disqualified since it's not atoning for anything, as it was rendered unnecessary. Therefore, this is actually a more obvious example of permanent disqualification according to Rabbi Yochanan. New topic. The Mishnah taught, Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 1, that Shimon ben Azai said, I received a tradition from 72 elders in Yavne. And about the term 72 elders, it's written 72 zaken, that all slaughtered offerings that are eaten, if slaughtered not for their sake, are fit, except for the Pesach and the sin offering. And the Gemara asks, why was this worded, the 72 elders, using the singular form zaken for elder, rather than the plural form zakanim? It didn't say 72 elders, it said the 72 elder. Very strange construction. It seems to be referring to 72 people, but instead of saying elders, it just says elder, singular. Why? And the Gemara answers, because all 72 maintained one opinion, i.e. they all agreed with this law. And our Mishnah continues that Ben Azai added only the burnt offering to the sin offering and the Pesach, which are mentioned in the first Mishnah as disqualified when sacrificed not for their own sake. All other offerings, if you slaughtered it, at the time of slaughter, you had some other offering in mind than the one that it was supposed to be, so then it would not fulfill the obligation of its owner who was bringing that offering, but it would remain fit to finish its journey to the altar, and it would be rendered a gift offering. The person would get credit for that, though he would not have fulfilled his obligation. But in the case of a Pesach and a sin offering, no. If he had the wrong kind of offering in mind at the time that it was slaughtered, disqualified from fulfilling his obligation and unfit, therefore can't complete its journey to the altar. Ben Azai would have added the burnt offering to the sin offering and the Pesach as ones that were disqualified and unfit if you had the wrong kind in mind, wrong type of offering in mind at the time of slaughter, but the majority of sages overruled him. Rav Huna said, what is the reason for the opinion of Ben Azai about considering the burnt offering like the sin offering and the Pesach? The verse states, it is a burnt offering, an offering made by fire of pleasing aroma unto the Lord in Leviticus 1:13. And the word it teaches that it is fit if sacrificed for its sake. If it is sacrificed not for its sake as a burnt offering, then it is unfit, like the sin offering. And the Gemara asks, but isn't the word it written with regard to the guilt offering as well? And we don't treat the guilt offering that way. Why didn't Ben Azai try to add both the guilt offering and the burnt offering? And the Gemara answers, that verse is written after the burning of the sacrificial portions on the altar. Since the offering is fit, even if these portions are not burned at all, it is certainly fit if they are burned not for the sake of a guilt offering. Meaning, after the blood is sprinkled, what happens to that offering? In the case of a sin offering, parts are burned on the altar, parts are eaten by the priest. Likewise with the guilt offering, but the parts that get burned on the altar, that's not dispositive to the sacrificial process. Just the parts that are eaten by the priest and the blood that is sprinkled on the altar. The Gemara, so the Gemara asks, isn't this mention of the word it with regard to a burnt offering also written after the burning of the sacrificial portions on the altar? So why are we going to distinguish the burnt offering from the guilt offering? And they both seem to have the same construction in the Torah. And so the Gemara answers, the word it is written with regard to a burnt offering in two places, both in Leviticus 1:13 and in Exodus 29:18. Although both are written regarding the burning of the portions consumed on the altar, which in the case of the burnt offering is all of the animal, after his blood is sprinkled on the altar. One of them is superfluous, and it is therefore interpreted in reference to the main sacrificial rites performed before the burning of the portions. The verse therefore teaches that the offering is fit only if these rites are performed for its sake. The Gemara asks, with regard to a guilt offering as well, isn't the word "it" written in two places? Leviticus 5:9, Leviticus 7:5. So rather, Ben-Azai derives his law not from a verse, but by a kal v'chomer inference. Just as with regard to a sin offering, which is not totally consumed on the altar, but some of it is eaten by the priests, if one slaughtered it not for its sake, it is disqualified. So too, with regard to a burnt offering, which is treated more strictly in that it is totally consumed on the altar, all the more so is it not clear that if it is slaughtered not for its sake, it is disqualified. This would be Ben-Azai's argument. Sounds like a good kal v'chomer, but the rabbis, the majority, rejected it. And the Gemara also rejects this inference. What is notable about a sin offering? It is notable in that it atones for a sin, in contrast to a burnt offering, which is not brought for atonement. So although the burnt offering has the greater stringency in that all of it is consumed by the altar, it also has its own unique feature that it atones for a sin, and burnt offerings don't do that. So the Gemara suggests a Pesach can prove the point, as it is not brought for atonement, and yet, like the sin offering, it is disqualified if sacrificed not for its own sake. So why don't we add the burnt offering to this category? And the Gemara rejects this argument. What is notable about a Pesach? It is notable in that its time is set at Erev Pesach, in contrast to a burnt offering, which doesn't have a designated time. A burnt offering, an olah, could be brought anytime during the year, unlike a Pesach. So the Gemara suggests, if so, a sin offering can prove the point, because a sin offering, a chatas, also could be brought anytime during the year. And just as happened yesterday and the day before, our argument has become circular. The inference has reverted to its starting point. The law, therefore, needs to be derived from the common element of the Pesach and the sin offering, which are unique and distinguished, and if slaughtered not for their sake, are unfit. Whereas the burnt offering doesn't have the element that those other two share. And what is that? The aspect of this is not like the aspect of that, and the aspect of that is not like the aspect of this. Their common element is that they are offerings, and if one slaughtered them not for their sake, they are disqualified. So too, I shall include a burnt offering in this law, as it is an offering, and therefore, if one slaughtered it not for its sake, it should be disqualified. But the Gemara says, no, you can't make that inference. What is notable about the common element of the Pesach and the Chatas? It is that they both have an element of kares. A sin offering is brought for transgression that is punishable by kares if it was committed intentionally. And one who refrains intentionally from bringing a Pesach is liable to be punished with kares. If you remove yourself from the Jewish people on Pesach, that's a big sin. You need to be part of the Jewish people on Passover. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And the Gemara answers that Ben-Azai does not refute the inference by citing a common element of kares, as the elements of kares in a sin offering and in a Pesach are not parallel. And the Gemara asks, if so, let it be derived from this inference that a guilt offering is also disqualified if not sacrificed for its sake. And the Gemara says, no. With regard to a guilt offering, Ben-Azai refutes that inference like this. What is notable about the common element of a sin offering and a Pesach? It is notable in that there are communal offerings as well as individual offerings of these types, as well as communal burnt offerings, whereas there's no communal guilt offering. And if you wish, say instead that actually Ben-Azai also refutes the entire inference, because a sin offering and a Pesach uniquely share an element of kares, like we just said. And the reason that Ben-Azai maintains that a burnt offering sacrificed not for its sake should be disqualified is that he learned it as a tradition. And as for the fact that Rav Huna cites a kal v'chomer inference, he does not believe it to be the true source of Ben-Azai's law. He said it only to sharpen the minds of his students with it, challenging them to refute it, which evidently they did. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Zevachim. We're on page 13a. We'll pick that up tomorrow, Monday, at the regular Monday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Let's see if we've got questions or comments. Nina is not available to pass them to me, so I am scanning. You guys are talking about the translation of Ben Ha'arbayim as afternoon or not afternoon or between the evenings. So I will let you guys discuss with each other. Sharon says, Sigh, the Talmud cat just got really vocal. I think the idea of consecrating half an animal bothered him. I'm sure that you are soothing Sigh, and he's back to purring. Karen, what did the act of consecration look like? Was there a verbal formula, or was it simply having the intention? Great question. Have we stated what is the actual elements, right, in a defined Gemara way? We just assume that, okay, if somebody consecrated an animal, and I think we've said over and over again, basically, if he says it out loud, this animal, is hereby consecrated for such and such a purpose, and that's different than taking a vow that, Lenator, I will bring, a burnt offering to the temple, or I will bring this animal as a burnt offering. Those have different results. The first one, I will bring a burnt offering, means that if he then designates an animal and then that animal develops a blemish, he has to bring another animal. Whereas if he vows to bring this animal and it develops a blemish, okay, so then he can't bring it. But he doesn't have to bring another. He could if he wants to, but he doesn't have to. That's with regard to the law of vows. But the question is, what is just about consecration? No vow involved, but if somebody designates an animal. And Karen is asking, well, is it enough to look at it and say, in my mind, that's the one? Is it now consecrated? Or do I have to speak that out loud? Or do I have to do more than words and set that animal aside, separate enclosure, put a mark on it, tie a string around its neck, something? I don't know. Great question. I suspect we'll come to that later in this tractate. Sharon says, I seem to remember from my JTS Talmud class days ages ago that there was a competition of sorts between Sura and Pumbedisa. And that there were big yeshivas in those two cities. And I guess kind of like a Harvard and Yale type of rivalry. I think that's right. But I don't know how much more it extends than that. I don't know that there was any kind of formal competition. That doesn't ring a bell for me. But I'm sure there was a friendly type of jibing competition. Lucy, I wonder how they managed to sacrifice all those Pesach lambs in one afternoon. It seems impossible with the thousands of people needing to participate in this complex ritual. Yes, but I think that was the reason why there were certain days of the year when all the priests were on duty. Right? Remember that we have the priestly watches. So like sort of all the Kohanim who were fit to serve in the temple were divided into, I believe, 24 groups who would serve for 1 week at a time, 2 weeks a year. But on Pesach, they all had to be there. So that which is to tell you that they had hundreds and hundreds of priests. And they had a system. And it was very quick, right? I mean, it was like a person would bring in the lamb, boom, check the lamb. A priest was there to receive some of the blood. He's running off to sprinkle it on the altar. The person, had it slaughtered for him. He leaves the temple compound. Next. It was quick. And I guess somehow they were able to do it. But, I think I think all of us modern people, who don't hang around in butcher shops or in meat packing plants, that's not really a scene we would enjoy. A lot of blood. But okay, so it was necessary so that people could get to what I think is beautiful to think about is that all over Jerusalem, you basically had like campgrounds in the city, around the city, where you have groups of people, having a fire and roasting their Pesach, and probably a Shalomim as well, and telling the story of the Exodus. What's interesting is the Seder actually didn't exist yet, right? The Seder, as we know it, and the recounting of the debate between Akiva and Ben-Azar and Elazar ben Azariah and Ben Azai, right? That didn't exist. Those sages lived later and had that debate later than when the temple existed. And in fact, that debate was shortly after the temple was destroyed. So when the temple actually was standing, they celebrated the Pesach, and presumably they recounted, you shall tell your child on that day, why are you eating this Pesach, right? Because the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. But it would look different than our Seder and the Haggadah, etc. That didn't exist yet. But what they did have, is hundreds or thousands of these, outdoor dinner parties, roasting the lamb or the goat, telling the story of leaving Egypt, and all in the holy city of Jerusalem, by firelight. It must have been an incredible, beautiful scene. I'm sure there was a lot of singing as well. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday, at the regular Monday time, 6 p.m. Pacific.